Hello, everyone. I just wanted to break down something that I hope can be helpful for some people. It's the idea that person is kind of who they are, and so when they behave a certain way, they are just being themselves. And so when they're in a certain environment and they learn to behave that certain way, then they take that into every environment because they start to see themselves as that's who they are. And maybe they don't necessarily like who they are, but they think that because that's the way that they behave, because that's the way that they've learned to behave, that's the way that they will continue to behave, and that is who they are. And also, maybe that these things that were trained into them at a young age are kind of sticking around forever and ever. I'll try and go through some examples, and I'll use examples from my own life because that makes the most sense, and then hopefully some people can relate to this stuff. So one example would be with writing. I enjoy writing, but I've kind of seen myself as having to write to my emotions. So if I'm in a good mood, then I write happy things, and if I'm in a sad mood, I write sad things. And if I'm in like like an angry mood, then I can write, the battle scenes in a book, like a fantasy book. But I'm starting to realize that that is actually quite silly. That it's I can learn to write a good battle scene, or I can learn to write a good love scene, or a good um, I can learn to write a good, you know, beautiful scene when I'm not feeling romantic, and I can learn to write a very sad scene even when I'm feeling very happy myself. And of course, I know how these things should feel in the book because I have myself felt these things, but I don't have to be currently feeling these things right now. Another example might be in the career that you're in. You might be in a career where maybe it's male dominated, and so it's very full of like testosterone and that, male kind of gruffness that just kind of comes out because guys think they're supposed to be tough all the time, and so they try and be tough, and they end up being kind of like immature and rude and get really actually quite offended really easily. And then you, as a outsider, if you know better, you're like, well, this is just silly. Everybody's being very silly. But if you're not an outsider, maybe you're a young kid, and then you look up to these people, and you start to think that this is how you're supposed to behave. And then you start to build that personality into yourself, and then you take that into other aspects of your life, your day to day, your friends and family, your the random things that you do. You start behaving this way because you are learning how to behave, because that's what you're being shown, and you're young, so you are still taking in the world with a bit of like ignorance and like fresh eyes, and so you don't have that self compass quite there yet to be like, no, I don't want to do that. And even if you do, eventually some of that kind of creeps in, and you get sand in your gears or whatever. All that to say that, let's say that maybe it is easier to behave this way in this position. So when you're at work, it is easier to be gruff and straight shooter, sort of like emotionless, than to try and be like compassionate and understanding and caring when no one else around you is. So you go to work and you're a bit harsh, you're a bit gruff, you're a bit like masculine or whatever. And then, but that isn't who you are. That's just a learned thing that you picked up wherever. And so you can also learn to come home or go to your friends and have a different attitude or a different outlook, and not be gruff, be compassionate, be caring, be funny, be silly. These things where, you know um it's not just environmental, but it's like a choice you could make where there's a learned trait, and you could say, okay, this is a learned trait I have, and I'm going to choose to implement this learned trait in these scenarios. um, and and that can be very useful. another example of that is like I I am part of an improv comedy troupe, and so when I in my day to day, I can be a bit more serious, and it's just the way I am. It's but at improv comedy, I can, get a bit more silly, and there's everybody has permission and encouragement at improv to be silly and funny and a little chaotic, and um, that is, fostered, and everyone is there for that reason, and so it's a good place to get into that sort of thing, and that is a learned trait, and I enjoy that sort of thing as well, so I bring some of that home, but definitely not to the extent that I can or I do at improv. And I've seen people, like when we're at improv together, people are all very silly, but then I've seen those same people outside of improv, and it's the same thing with them, where they're a lot, not necessarily more serious, but like not as um, chaotically silly as they are at improv practice. So I just thought these were some cool examples of how personalities and things, and this can apply to anything, like a new skill. You can be bad at math, but just decide you want to learn to do computer programming, or you can really hate going outdoors, but then decide, hey, I actually really want to get into outdoor climbing. That's just a skill that I really want to learn. And maybe classically, I'm like more of an introvert and an indoor person, but I want to learn this outdoor skill, and that's just something, or like maybe I want to learn survival, and that's just something that I desire to do. And so it's not that you're pushing against who you are. It's just a skill, and you're just learning something, and then that is something that you now know. And it might even be like something that you learn might even be like how to be more emotionally available, and that is a skill that you can learn, and then that affects your relationships. Generally, it's a positive thing. And when you're more emotionally available and more emotionally aware, then you can be more emotionally available for other people, and you can more easily understand. This is probably more of a guy thing, but like there are all kinds of people with bound up emotions who don't know how to feel or what to feel or how to process their own emotions, let alone other people's emotions. And so this is something that is very interesting. You can learn the skill of processing emotions better. And so that's kind of cool. Not to over intellectualize emotions, but I mean, it's good that it's something that you can learn, which means that anybody can get better at it. And that's a good thing. So, anyways, I hope this made sense, and I hope this was somewhat helpful for someone, and that you guys can take this and think about it. And yeah, all right, cheerio.